Hey, Grow Group leaders, I'm back. We're in Titus 1:10 through 16. Just want to give you a couple things to think about for this week. Number one, the verses 5 through 9 is going to give a lot of help going into this coming week, which, I mean, no surprise there when you look at the context of Titus and what John, what Paul is writing to Titus. He's telling them and telling him for the church they need to have these leaders that are biblically sound in doctrine. And I'm going to plug in my computer so it doesn't die. But they need this, and they need sound leaders so that they can continue to encourage others in sound doctrine and know how to correct it. Because if you look at verse 9, it says, holding faithful to the message as taught, so that he will be able both to encourage with sound teaching. Sorry, I meant to say to encourage with sound teaching and to refute those who contradict it. So there's this sense of encouragement, but there's also rebuke. So he's already setting the stage for that. The whole purpose of rebuking or correcting, or that same word is used as like shining a light in the darkness. It's kind of like what Jesus talks about in the book of John, I believe, that his message is a light in the darkness. And so, with all that being said, uh, the reason for verse 9 and for the previous couple verses for establishing these leaders is that there's these false teachers, and they're described as rebellious, full of empty talk, which means they essentially talk, but they're not really saying anything of substance. But in that, they're deceiving people. And then it says the circumcision party is especially responsible for this. What I can infer from this is these are the ones that are Jewish Christians who have relied on Old Testament tradition, or really more of the ceremonial laws, for their outward purity, but they're not inwardly pure. Sounds familiar, right? It's a lot what Jesus had to deal with the Pharisees in Mark 7, which is a cross reference for this passage. But he attaches these false teachers to the Cretans, who are the ones that are called liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This is from one of their own philosophers of that area. And I mean, it's pretty straightforward. These false teachers need to be silenced by Titus and the authorities of the church. And then it says this, for this reason, rebuke them sharply, like cut to it. Get to the truth. But it's all for the purpose and the result of this, so that we may be sound in the faith. So there's always this need for reconciliation. There's always this need for restoration. So that's where it gets down to it. And then what's really interesting is, he talks about the pure in verse 15. To the pure, everything is pure. And what he means by that is not that everyone who is pure doesn't mean they don't sin. But what it does mean is they're pure in Christ if they've been given a pure heart and a pure mind, and they've been truly saved and cleansed by Christ himself and by his work. But those who are defiled, they're trying to receive that outward beauty, but it's like what it talks about in the Old Testament, and also refers in Revelation 2:23. Their lips, they try to say all these moral things, and they think they know God, but then inwardly they are far apart from him. And so the key thing I want students to get out of this is, number one, let's recognize false teachers and false teaching. And then how do we take part in helping silence them? Well, one part of it is we have to be supportive of our leadership and letting them have that part in there. But the biggest part of it is we recognize the false teachers, and then we know what we believe biblically. So I'm going to challenge students, like, you need to know what you are reading and what you need to know so that you're able to combat when you hear false teaching, or you're able to ignore it. Because what's the most common thing that that spreads is something that's so small but so deceiving and seems enticing, but really ends up really affecting the spiritual health of the church. And I'm going to bring up the illustration of kudzu. Kudzu looks very pretty. It looks really looks very decorative, But the problem is with kudzu, and when it was planted way back in the day, with this Japanese plant, ended up taking over the healthy trees and the healthy vegetation and killed it. Um, and so, and it grows even like 1 foot per day. So I mean, like, just comparing that to false teaching, how it's just so quick to grow and spread, and then before you know it, it's taken over. And so there's some false teaching we're not going to be able to prevent. There's going to be stuff that's going to happen, but we can keep our church healthy and our student ministry healthy by proclaiming the gospel, rehearsing the gospel, and recognizing, and even more importantly, let's examine ourselves. And that's what I'm going to challenge the students with this week with Titus 1:10 through 16.